Hello everybody, my name is Helena and we are here for a conversation with Gregor Maed, who's going to join us in a moment. Today is Monday, the 13th of November 2023, and I am speaking from Mallorca in Spain. Here is 9 a.m. and Gregor Maed will be joining us from Australia. So I will begin by apologizing in advance for any mistake I might do, because English is not my main language. I am originally from Brazil. Gregor is a German teacher, and I'll give you a quick introduction about him while he's not joining us. Gregor is a professor and a writer and a yogi that has been practicing and studying very deeply all yoga limbs, all yoga topics for more than 40, almost 50 years. And he's the author of many important international books covering the 8 limbs of yoga, not only covering asana, but yoga meditation, pranayama, mudras, and the higher aspirations. Also, he has a book on samadhi. And he's a very knowledgeable person who I consider a lot. I had the opportunity to study with him firstly in Paris in a week-long intensive. And then I feel moved to take his training. I guess that was 2017 in Bali for a month. He's here. Hello.
Hello, Helena. Namaste.
Namaste.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello.
perfectly. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I had some technical difficulties in joining, but I think I figured it out. This was the first time for me to do live Instagram. So
Nice. No,
thanks for having
I can
me.
hear you well. Can you hear me well?
Yes, fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I was just telling them how I got to meet you, how I got to study with you for a while, and that I wrote you a message, and I believe many of us, your students, did, from a place of despair, from a place of hopeless, from a place of feeling truly disturbed from what we are witnessing around the world right now, and trying to make sense of everything, and how can we move forward from this, and how can we as practitioners act from all these feelings, and how can we as a community as well stand clearly upon, not unwashing or not pretending this is not happening, like we see so many people reacting. I have a few questions for you, but I will leave you free to introduce in the way you like to. This is more like a conversation, it's not a formal interview. If anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to join us, but please be really respectful and with no offense or anything like that, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, first, I hope that I can do the introduction that you gave me some justice. I don't know whether I can, but first I would like to set a little bit of a, let's say, a platform, a stage from which we can inquire. I will look into the historical, spiritual, and psychological and political implications of 5,000 years of permanent warfare. Yeah, just to set a stage a bit, so not that we get too absorbed with the fact what is happening right now in this very moment, because we have been here over and over again. Yeah, and probably as we go on from here, they're talking about the coming wars. So let's talk a little bit about the background. And first, I also want to say that I have studied history, so I went to university and I studied history. I also did a brief venture into doing a course in drug rehabilitation. That's why the psychological side always comes in. I trained as a therapist in drug rehabilitation back in the 1980s. I also studied comparative religion and philosophy, but my mainstay was, of course, practice of yoga and study of Indian philosophy. Yeah. So first I want to throw in a couple of historical snippets. Recently in Spain, there was an archaeologist discovered a mass grave, and what they have found there that they backdated systematic warfare by 1,000 years to 5,000 years ago. Yeah, so they found 300 bodies in a mass grave. They were mainly males. A lot of them had serious injuries. They had repeated injuries, so they were injured in battle. A lot of them had arrowheads lodged in them. And from that, the archaeologists came to conclude that this was actually systematic warfare, yeah? Not just one battle. So we have to look at that we are in this now since 5,000 years. It's not a new thing. Yeah. The other thing is also when we look at this recent war or these two recent wars, let's not just talk about the Middle East war, but also the war between Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of talk about that a war can be solved through war. Yeah. When you look at it from the perspective of a historian, you realize that each war begets another 2 or 3 down the track. A war doesn't end with peace. A war may end with a truce, or it may end with a ceasefire, or it will end with a victory. But then, even if you are victorious, from the mass graves of your victims, let's use that term, if you were victorious, notice the relation between victory and victim. Yeah, there's always a victor and a victim in victory. From those mass graves, new generations of warriors will rise, which will again wage war against you. And ultimately that will lead to your downfall. Some empires like the Roman Empire were very long lasting, but also they were eventually overcome by their assailants, by their previous victims. Some historians say World War II was an exception. That's not the case. World War II only led to a balance of terror. After World War II, we had an endless succession of proxy wars in Vietnam, Africa, Middle East, Syria, etc. And in South America, we had an ongoing string of military coups and dictatorships that also came out of World War II. So what I'm saying is peace can only come through peace, not through war, because the discussion is only about on which sides of the battle do you join. Yeah, and the battle itself is never questioned. Yeah, so that means if we want to peace, we don't just need a ceasefire or a truce, but we actually need to inquire where the war comes from. Now, war usually comes from antagonism, that problems like antagonism and adversarialism haven't been solved. Let's look into what is war actually good for? Why do wars take place? They usually take place out of the need for revenge. And of course, the other reason is business. It's good for business, good for weapons sale. So I go to the next subject, so these were what I've just discussed were the historical implications. Now we'll briefly discuss some political implications. I start that with a quote from Lord Acton from 1750. He uses that term great men, but what he actually means is powerful men. And he says, great men in almost all cases are not good men, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. From that, I learn that the longer you are in power, the more you can become corrupted by power. Yeah. So you can notice that when you see leaders that are in power I think there should be a limit that somebody can be in power for 8 years, no more. That's, for example, in the United States. Because what happens as you may even start with really good intentions, but when you are in the top job for a really long time, it becomes more and more about staying in power. And you become more and more interested only in sustaining your own power rather than to serve the electorate. You become more and more self-serving. And so that's why Lord Acton says you become more and more corrupt. And so please note that all of these wars, there is usually like a very, very strong component of people who have been in power for a really long time. Yeah. And, you know, how can it be that somebody is in power for, let's say, almost 2 decades? Yeah. That is sort of like a belittling of the intellect of the electorate. Do you want to tell me that an entire nation of 10 million people or 100 million people cannot bring somebody forth that is at least as good in the job than that person that has been in the job for 10 years? Okay, let's talk briefly about, let's mention the myth of the nation state. The myth of the nation state was something that was created only in the last 200 years. Before that, we were subjects of a particular king, yeah, and only then, or some monarch, you know, Maharaja, or whatever you want to call them, and only after that, in the last 200 years, the idea of nation state have been created. The reason why I'm saying that, question that in yourself: am I really that? Yeah. For example, I recently read an article just a few days ago that was written by a Russian general. His name is Khodorkovsky. And he wrote an article in response to the ethnic violence in a province of the Russian Federation, which is called Dagestan. Some of you may have never heard it. Dagestan is to the east of Chechnya, and it borders the Caspian Sea. And the people in Dagestan are Muslims. In Dagestan, there was some ethnic violence, and it started with Muslims trying to storm a plane that had arrived from Israel. And basically ethnic violence started, and it quickly turned into a problem because it pitched people from Dagestan against ethnic Russians. Yeah. And so this general Khodorkovsky, you know, he of course argued we need unity in Russia because we are in a war. And so he said, in order to achieve unity, we can't define who is Russian along ethnic lines, because he said, if you analyze the DNA of people who live in Russia, you will actually find that most of them have not Russian ancestry. Yeah, Russia is a limited area, Moscow, Petersburg, to the south. But a lot of people in this giant Russian Federation are not ethnic Russians. So he said, instead of that, to be Russian actually means to believe in a set of values. Yeah, and he said, these values are such as truth, honesty, nobility. And I was like, wow, these are values in which I believe myself. According to these values, I'm Russian. Yeah. So you have to really be careful to be sucked into the myth of a nation state, because the myth of a nation state always argues others or us versus others. Yeah. Which is, of course, the same argument that fascists make. Yeah. So you have to be really careful. If you believe in the myth of a nation state, when does the philosophy of a nation state, the myth, actually border into fascism? That means that's us and these are the others. Our problems are caused by the others. Therefore, we need to stick together and fight against the others. Well, this is a philosophy which is, of course, antagonism and adversarialism that inevitably, over the long term, leads to warfare. So it is this, the us versus other versus the others, that we have to overcome. Yeah. So let's look then next into the psychological implications. Where does adversarialism and antagonism actually come from? That is what is at the heart of all conflict. And that is the inability to see yourself in your adversary. Yeah. If you really step back and you look at a conflict from far away, and you really have a look at, okay, who is fighting there? Yeah. Let's say Israelis versus Palestinians, Russians versus Ukrainians. You actually see that they are not that different to yourself. You know, you need to try to see yourself in the foe in the humanity of that foe. Yeah, and you realize, well, look, they love their children exactly like we love ours. Yeah, and if you really sit down with them, ask what values do you believe in, you will find that they believe in the same values as you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the cause of adversarialism and antagonism is usually, it boils down to an extrapolated conflict that we have between ourselves, in ourselves. It usually means that there are aspects within ourselves that we hate, self-loathing, self-depreciation, self-hatred. For some reason, we're not good enough. And from that, we fuel things such as career, money, success in life. And we try to become worthy in the eyes of others, like primarily our parents. Yeah. But also, when we can't actually look at certain things truthfully in things that we can't accept about ourselves. So I repeat myself. If there's certain things that we find difficult to accept in ourselves, we project them onto others and we hate them in others. So for example, you will notice that usually when it comes to war, governments will dehumanize the enemy. Yeah, we will hear that they are rats or snakes or trolls or orcs or subhumans.
Yeah.
And what that is an unowned or disowned judgment against ourselves, against parts of our own psyche. And because we can't look at that, well, actually, you know what? I'm exactly the same. I'm no better than them. Yeah. And so instead of honestly looking at myself and say, well, in bad moments, I've done things like that myself. Yeah. Like characteristics that they are terrorists. Yeah. They are subhumans. Yeah. Well, am I really that much better? Yeah. But I extrapolate that conflict that is raging in myself, and instead of honestly saying, well, I'm actually not that great, to be honest. I have to really look at myself, that I have these characteristics that I'm judging there in myself. And instead of that, I put myself on the moral high horse and tell these cretins, those subhumans, we need to exterminate them for a whole generation, basically, that they can't come back at us. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to move this forward. So all atrocities, etc., are motivated by self-hatred. Yeah, and I'm a great example. For example, the Holocaust of the Nazis committed on the Jewish people. Obviously, I have a German background myself. The Germans are great at self-hatred. Yeah, and that Holocaust was really motivated and fueled by self-hatred. It's because the German people hated themselves so much that they projected that onto the Jewish people and said, okay, now we have a place where we have externalized it. Now we just need to exterminate that place and then we are healed. Yeah. So it's basically what's called a scapegoat, because a scapegoat means that you take a sacrificial animal, you perform a ritual slow, you project all of your negativity in that sacrificial animal, and then you slaughter it, and then you have gotten rid of it, so to say. It's sort of like a primitive belief. Yeah. This is what happened with the Holocaust. Yeah. And of course, it is only when you hate yourself and do not respect yourself that you can do such a thing to other people. What I'm talking about is mass murder on an industrial scale. No self-respecting and no self-esteeming person would ever do such a thing. Yeah. So then we have to ask ourselves, what do we need for something like that to be not possible? Yeah. So that we can't do that. And the answer of that is to love and respect and appreciate oneself. Yeah, I just throw that in here because that's actually not that easy. If you look at the cultures, and now of course going globally, where they come from, because we are raised without self-love, we are raised without self-respect, and we are raised without self-appreciation. And of course, the next step was then, of course, capitalism to link into that and say, okay, let's keep you there. Because if you don't respect and love and appreciate yourself, then we can sell you an endless avalanche of, excuse me, shit, which you then can buy, that you then feel good about yourself. So capitalism functions exactly according to that. You need to be good looking, you need to have a big car, a big house, beautiful clothes, you need to have all of those amazing cosmetic products, etc., etc. It never ends. You're never good enough. Okay. So let's look into the next thing that is really important when we look at conflict, war, military conflict, and that is a pathologically reduced sense of self. If I can include my enemies into my sense of self, then they're not my enemies anymore. I care about them as much as I care for self. So a quick explanation: in single cell organisms all the way up to the reptile, the sense of self includes what's under your skin only. They will eat their offspring if they can get hold of them. Then we go on to the mammalian stage, when we become mammals in the course of biological evolution. Being mammals, what is included in the sense of self is our children, our parents, the family, and our territory. So, for example, mammals will die to defend their children. Reptiles didn't do that. So then, as we go on from here, the next stage is the so-called monkey brain, which is the neocortex. Next stage of evolution. More complex hierarchical structures, very complex hierarchical structures that eventually led to kingdoms, states, and now in our case, ideologies such as capitalism. So you're a communist, I'm prepared to kill you. And the communist says, what, you're a capitalist? I'm prepared to kill you. Or you're Muslim? Sorry, I'm Christian. I come over and do a crusade and I bash your skull in. Or you're Jew, you're Muslim, we kill each other. Or you're Hindu, a Muslim, we kill each other. So it's ideologies. So ideologies, ultimately, the sense of self, when the neocortex is developed, the sense of self includes your ideology. Now, what is important is that we go on from there and activate what the yogis would call the heart chakra, or the heart brain, in which all humanity is included in the sense of self, and so on. So just want to throw that in quickly, because unfortunately the way how the yogic chakra system is displayed or described in general, it really reads like mumbo jumbo, but it's actually an amazing system of evolutionary psychology. For example, if you compare Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs or pyramid of needs, it almost completely tallows with the yogic chakra system, that I wonder whether Maslow was actually inspired by the chakra system. Maslow extended the hierarchy of needs more and more as he became older, as he became more and more spiritual. Before he died, the last level that he added was, I think, the 7th or the 8th level. I think the 8th level. He finished with an 8-stage pyramid, and what that was called the need for self-transcendence, or ego transcendence, we would call it. Now, then he, of course, went really into the spiritual dimension. Okay, I'll come now to the last area that I want to talk to, and that is the metaphysical foundations of the inquiry into warfare, the expansion of one's sense of self. So sense of self means what is included into self versus what is excluded, what is other. Yeah. And so the expansion, the gradual expansion of your sense of self comes from spiritual practice. I just want to throw that in. Spiritual practice could, for example, mean the practice of Sufism, that's done in Islam, the practice of Kabbalism or Hasidism, that is esoteric Judaism. Then, of course, in yoga is, you could say, mystical Hinduism. In Buddhism, we have various disciplines such as Vajrayana or Zen Buddhism. Vajrayana is a Tibetan Buddhism. Then we have, of course, animism or shamanism, that is the religion of the indigenous people. Then further east, we have Taoism and Shinto, etc. So when I'm talking about spiritual practice, I mean the totality of all of that. Yeah, but it's certainly good to practice if you're interested to overcome warfare and also your own antagonism and adversarialism towards other people. It's essential you practice sincerely one of those spiritual modalities. Yeah. Once you have had significant mystical or spiritual experiences brought on by practice, you will then see yourself in Israelis, Palestinians, Russians, Ukrainians, and them in yourself. Yeah. I have, of course, now paraphrased a passage from the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, "Who sees me in all beings and all beings in me truly sees." Yeah? That is the view that comes from spiritual practice. And then once you have come to that point, it's really hard to hate others and to be adversarial towards them. It doesn't make any sense anymore to wage war against them. Then you ask yourself the question, you will see their position and you will actually realize, well, if I take myself back for a moment and forget that I am American, Chinese, Russian, etc., and I just, without forgetting my position and just listening to what they say, I come to the conclusion that it's actually reasonable what they say. Yeah, it's reasonable. And then you start to ask yourself, what do those people actually need to feel safe? Because the reason why they attack me is because they don't feel safe. And so I have to ask myself, what do I have to do for them to feel safe? And if we always ask ourselves that, rather than to say, who's right and who's wrong, and what do I have to do to wipe them out, and they're subhumans, if we ask, well, look at the position, what you want, what they want. Yeah, they just want to be safe. Okay, next point. Because I talked about spiritual practices, a lot of people, when they go into spirituality, they hanker for spiritual experiences. Spiritual experiences are overvalued. Spiritual experiences are only valuable to the extent to which they make you a changed person. What that means is, to what extent have made your spiritual experiences more supportive, compassionate towards others, including people, animals, plants, the land, etc.
Yeah.
Now, when I mentioned that people, animals, plants, the land, etc., what I've called the heart chakra includes to see all other humans included in your sense of self. Yeah, the whole human family. Yeah, that means that I'm saying, well, actually, I'm hurting as much for Russians, Ukrainians, Palestinians, Israelis that I do for myself. Yeah, that's called the heart chakra. Yeah, but of course, what needs to come after that is to include all other organisms, animals, trees, and the land. That's the next level.
Yeah.
So
he just said that the next level would be to include, because there was a connection issue, to include the animals, the trees, the land, and all living beings.
That's so-called and geological formations, the atmosphere and rivers. Yeah, that's really important, because what you've asked, and what really struck me when you sent me your email originally, you said something to the extent that you were so frustrated because we should all be uniting and fighting against climate change and mass destruction of life, and here we are fighting against each other. Yeah. And of course, that's totally true. We are at a crucial point in our history where if we don't work together as a team, one body, one humanity, one family of humans, we will wipe ourselves out.
Yes.
Yeah. And here we are, as you said, instead of that, we realize that we have common challenges. Yeah. Just now, there was an article today that the the current around the South Pole is now leaking. The West Antarctic ice shelf is collapsing.
Yeah.
So that's what we really need to work at. We need to come together. And instead what we do is we are fighting. We're fighting against each other.
Yeah. And it's spending billions and billions of dollars in distracting each other. And this money could be used, you know.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to quote Jesus Christ. It's a really important quotation from the gospel. He said, when you come and place an offering on the altar, while yet holding a grudge against your brother, your offering is not welcome because it will defile the altar. Go and make peace with your brother first, then come and bring your offering, and then it will be welcome.
Wow.
Yeah. That is a very, very important statement. So here it says, do not try to bring religion into all of that. If you fight against another human, if you experience hatred against another human, if you experience adversarialism, antagonism against one of my children, what you're doing is not religion. Call it something else, but not religion. That is the essence. So again, I'm going back to the Bhagavad Gita, because I'm inquiring now into spiritual foundations. Krishna saying, I am the self in the heart of all beings. And he said in another text, the Bhagavata Purana, if you want to express love for me, so Krishna says, if you want to express love for me, don't do it by worshipping the dead image. Do it by treating all of my beings with love and respect, and be supportive of them because I am in them. That's really important. And of course, the next thing is to go back to Jesus. So much in this whole discussion is about who's right, who's wrong. We're both wrong. We're all wrong. We're all wrong. Jesus said, judge not, because by the meter by which you judgest, you yourself shall be judged. It's really important. There's so much hatred in this, in both of these conflicts, and in the coming conflicts, of course. This doesn't end. Apparently there is a war scheduling. There's a queue of wars lining up to be attended to. Apparently there's one coming up with Iran. Apparently there's a war coming up with North Korea. Apparently there's a war over Taiwan coming up. There's an endless queue. So that's why we have to go back and we have to look at where does it all come from. So there is a tendency to use the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, for example, for call to arms. Because I'm a lifelong student of those two texts, I would want to quickly diffuse that. In the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, God in the form of Krishna is repeatedly reborn, or Vishnu as Krishna is reborn as a human to purge the earth of demons that have become incarnated as humans. At the end of the Mahabharata war, all members of the defense force are dead, all of them. Like in the end, Krishna even kills the people that fought on his own side. He destroys the entire Yadava clan, the so-called Pandavas, the entire army of the Pandavas that consists of 1 million warriors. They're all dead. Yeah. So God kills them too, because they all have become haughty in judging others. Yeah. And at the end of this war, 2.5 million people are dead. Only 6 weapon-capable people survive. Yeah, I can mention the names now, but it doesn't help. They're all semi-divine beings. They're all sons of some god. So no humans able to carry a weapon actually survive. Yeah. So in other words, the war that is described in the Bhagavad Gita is more like a general purging along the lines of the biblical flood. Yeah. It's not something that we ourselves can say, oh, because of that, I go to war now. Yeah. In that line, I'm called the Old Testament, there's a beautiful saying in there that says, do not bless and do not curse. Revenge is mine, saith the Lord. Yeah, what that means is, do not put yourself into the seat of the judge. I am the law of karma. The karmic boomerang will always catch up with the evildoers. You don't have to worry about that. You have the right to self-defense, okay, granted, yeah, but it's not upon you to meter out judgment to other people. I will do that.
Can I pause you for a second? From this quote that you just mentioned, with the question of what is our responsibility as yogis amidst what's going on, and do we just internalize what's happening and work on yourself and do our own practices and try to heal our small circle of relationships? Or do we have a role in calling for justice and help spreading the truth or taking action?
Yes, both. For example, in the Yoga Sutra, which is the most important text that yogis look to for instruction, it says, in the presence of one completely established in harmlessness, all violence ceases. Yeah, I repeat that. In the presence of one completely established in harmlessness, all violence ceases. Yeah, so the author of the Yoga Sutra actually talks here about a violence that you radiate out.
Yeah.
And of course, if you look at our evolutionary past, where we come from, of course, we have been mammals, before that reptiles, at some point we have been monkeys, yeah. We fought for our lives, or for our survival for such a long time, that we radiate out an inherent violence, maybe we can call it violence, an inherent threat. Yeah, and so the Yoga Sutra says it's really important that you overcome that. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also says, my devotee is somebody who is not afraid of anybody, but who doesn't cause fear in anybody either. Yeah. So that means we must in ourselves overcome the adversarialism and antagonism that is so deeply entrenched in our culture.
Yeah.
Now, next thing is what I want to talk about is, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Mahabharata, they are so-called Dharma Shastras. That means they're scriptures inquiring into right action. What is the right thing to do? And what is your duty? And it's really important that not everybody has the same duty. Okay, so you asked me about what's the right thing to do? What should we do? Yeah, and of course the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata are so-called Dharma Shastras. They inquire what is the right thing to do.
Yeah,
but there is not the right thing for every person. Yeah, but there is something called swadharma. That means own duty. That means what is your duty to do? And so that means you have to ask yourself, what is it? What is your duty? And that is a very, very sincere inquiry. Yeah. And about that, Krishna says in the Gita, better your own duty performed in a faulty fashion than somebody else's duty alien to your growth performed really well. Yeah. So he says, if you do something, somebody else's duty really well, although you do it well, it is alien to your growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the most important thing when you look at right action, although there is an action, a dharma to which we are all subject, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, etc., etc. We know all of these rules. We know what is the right thing to do. Yeah. But on top of that, there is a swadharma, and everybody needs to inquire into that and find out what that is. Yeah, which is ultimately, what is it that the divine wants to do through you? In what way that does the divine want to express it through you? Yeah. Now, I want to just give a small list of solutions, yeah, so that we can go home with something. Yeah. That's sort of the closest to a manifesto that I will give. Yeah. Okay. So on all of these stances need to be taken before conflict breaks out. To see yourself in the opponent and the opponent in yourself. Remove causes of adversarialism and antagonism, because conflict with yourself extrapolated leads to conflict between yourself and others. Therefore, call off conflict with yourself. Expand your sense of self to include others through spiritual practice. Ask yourself, what are your opponent's needs and what do they need in order to feel safe? And then through spiritual practice, recognize that it is the same Atman, that is self or soul, that is in you and also called others. And from that comes the ability to love your enemies. A really important thing is, again, this is a passage from the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, perform all actions in dedication to me without an eye on the fruit. Yeah, because whenever we do something, okay, we want to be involved in world peace or in the solution of conflict. And all of these attitudes we have because we're asking for a reward. Krishna calls that the fruits of the actions. He says, don't ask for the fruits. Do it simply as a service to me, to the divine, whatever that is for you. Yeah. So you do it as a service to the divine, not because you succeed with the outcome. Mm-hmm. A few statements from the Bhagavata Purana to finish off. Worship me, says Krishna, by serving me in all of my creatures. That's really important before we go to war. That's in the build up to the conflict with another nation. We need to realize that those subhumans, those cretins, are creatures of the divine. Yeah? He says, honor all beings as my manifestations, be they holy or outcasts, be they persecutors of holy men, be they tranquil personages or ferocious and cruel people. That's really important. Yeah? He says, even if somebody is a very, very faulty person, a criminal, a war criminal, he says, still honor them as my manifestation. Yeah. And remember how that comes in with Jesus says, judge not. Yeah. That so-called war criminal, that so-called terrorist, that person that you're hating, whoever they are on which either side, is a manifestation is a creature of the divine, however flawed they are. Then he says, in those who constantly seek to find my presence in all beings, there is no longer any competitiveness with equals, jealousy towards superiors, contempt for inferiors, and too much self-consciousness with regard to oneself. Okay, that was my pitch. I want to open now for questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you, Gregor. Here we go. This is a question from Mysore Yoga Zamalek in Egypt. I received, as yoga aspirants, our practice of yoga extends with our engagement with the world. I feel very much that there is a vacuum of engagement in the current crisis between Israel and Gaza. Why doesn't the yoga practice make us more compassionate towards the suffering of our fellow humans? What do you think could explain the silence among our peace-loving yoga community, many of whom seem to have aversion to dealing with the hard truths happening? And he adds, there's a term going on around called washing, which is basically spiritual bypassing. Is it okay that we retreat into our own practice and lives when we see so much suffering and genocide around us?
Okay. I don't see, so I am basically a hermit living in the forest at the end of the world, but I do interact intensely with the world through reading the news. I spend more than an hour every day to read the news. I read through at least 5 different news outlets every day. And of course, I communicate with a lot of people, and I see right the opposite. Yeah, everybody that I have talked to since the October 7 is either Islamophobe or an anti-Semite. I'm sorry to have to say that. Yeah, there might be some arm washers somewhere. They don't seem to be in my world. I'm sorry. I seem to be only come in contact with anti-Semites and Islamophobes. Yeah. And I don't know whether you have noticed that since the war started, the incidence of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism has risen by hundreds of % worldwide.
Yes.
And in some cases over 1,000%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Where I am, there is no arm washing. I don't know where you take that from. Everybody seems to have an opinion, and everybody seems to just be busy bagging a particular side. And there is so much trauma and so much hatred that the position of the other side simply cannot be seen anymore. Yeah. And I just want to state, we are setting ourselves up to 500 years of war in the Middle East. If there is going to be that much war, I don't think that humanity will survive it, because of course, Helena, you have rightfully pointed out that if you don't get our act together, make peace with each other, and then work together as one family on fixing climate change and mass extinction, like destruction of habitats, there will not be a future for us. Yeah, we will all die together.
Yeah.
But at this point, this conflict, if we don't end it through seeing the humanity of the others, there's going to be hundreds of years of warfare, and because this is what happened with the Roman Empire. It just kept on and on and on.
Yeah, I was watching one of your interviews 5 years ago, and you were wisely talking about the 6 mass extinction and how we are quickly losing around 60 species each day. And of course, we don't need to be experts. We see the droughts and now in Amazon rivers in Brazil, there's no water, and they have a huge drought. And some other places like in Dubai, there's a huge flow and there huge rains. I mean, it's a complete disaster, and we were beginning to have serious discussions upon the climate issue and regenerative agriculture or whatsoever. And then when it comes this level, this dimension of war that takes over, is as if we are walking back millions of years and we are deciding to kill each other, basically, to destroy each other, because we don't have that time to be playing. It looks like children
Yes.
playing with
Yes.
guns. We don't have that time anymore.
Yes.
No.
And please note also, like, okay, now everybody is talking about the Israeli-Palestinian war. But just before it was the Russian-Ukrainian war. And that's still going on. Yeah? So the Russian-Ukrainian war already took all focus away from working together internationally again as a global community. Now we are at war again between, the West against Russia.
Yeah. I guess that responds Barak's question. Barak made a question for you. Why do you think people from all over the world is so engaged with what's going on between Israel and Gaza? Relatively minor conflict compared to the hundreds of thousands killed in Ukraine.
Okay, I don't want to go too much into international policy, but there is an enormous amount at stake. For example, just before the terrorist attack, the Hamas terrorist attack, there was a meeting, a G20 meeting in India, and they decided they signed off on a trade corridor between India and Europe. And this trade corridor was to go through the Middle East, through Saudi Arabia and through Israel, and from there to Europe. And it was to bind India, which is a democracy, economically into Europe, which are democracies, and the United States, which is a democracy too. And of course, what that meant is that India was to be taken out of the, let's say, the influence of Russia. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what you have to realize is that the timing, it was about interrupting that. Yeah. Because India is going to be in the future the decisive weight, whether they join the West or whether they join the East, let's just say Russia, China, etc. That's going to be decisive. So again, I'm not saying right and wrong, but what I'm saying is that every nation on the whole world has a stake in this war in the Middle East. This is not just Israelis and Palestinians fighting against each other. This is a proxy war about which, let's say, power block gains the supremacy. And that is, again, for me, an advice to the people in the Middle East to just step back. It's not just that you're pitched against each other. There is global interests in pitching you against each other. It is in your interest as Israelis and Palestinians, it's obviously clear to you, to live in peace and harmony with each other, because otherwise you can never be in peace there. You can never be in peace. You always have to be afraid that the others come at you. Yeah. But you also have to realize that you are a pawn on a global chessboard. Yeah. Israel was supposed to be a link together with Saudi Arabia. That's why Israel and Saudi Arabia, there was a peace treaty to be brokered, and that got blown up. Yeah. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm saying this is what it is. This war, the reason why everybody is so interested in it, because it's one move on the global chessboard. Yeah. There is global powers. Do you want to be a pawn on a global chessboard? This is a proxy war that you fight for global superpowers. It can't be won, neither by Israel nor by Palestine, because behind it stand the two world's largest military blocs, neither of them is going to lose or win. If one of them tries to win, of course, there's going to be nuclear holocaust. They're all going to be dead. That's why they're fighting in proxy wars. So that needs to be understood. That's why it's so important.
Yeah. Thank you, Gregor. Haza Yoga has asked a question. As yogis, how do we navigate a world in which anti-identificationism is rising everywhere? I don't see that.
What was it?
Anyway,
what was it? Which term is it?
Anti-identificationism is rising everywhere.
I don't realize that it's rising. That's not what I see. Maybe that is taking place in some bubbles, so-called bubbles that are very insular.
Mm-hmm.
But what I see is that as soon as there is something proposed, there is immediately like a front. I'm on this side, you're on the other, let's kill each other.
Yeah.
This is what I see. I see the problem that people identify themselves too quickly with a particular ideology or a front and say, these are my guys, I'm going to join that camp and we're going to be victorious. Yeah. Look at, for example, the Olympic Games. Yeah. People are barracking for a particular country only because they're born in that country. Why shouldn't I barrack to the guys born? Why don't we just do sports together, not against each other? Yeah. Look at martial arts. Look at boxing, mixed martial arts. You're going to go there. Somebody gets beaten up. Look at entertainment, how violent it is. Yeah. Mission Impossible and all of that stuff. It's all about, we want to see the perpetrator being beaten up. Yeah. What about the humanity of the perpetrator? What about the suffering? What about asking, why did that person become like that? What happened to them? Yeah. I don't see anti-identification. I think I see that there is too much identification.
And actually, he corrected. He corrected.
Okay.
So he wrote it wrong. He said, I meant racism. He said that racism is rising. It's rising.
It is totally rising. It is totally rising. And if I may say so, if I actually feel, I personally feel a certain embarrassment and a certain level of shame at the amount of Islamophobia in Western countries. And it's like, if you're an Arab, or if you're a Muslim, or if you come from the Middle East, or if you're an Afghani, or if you're an Iraqi, it's like, you're a terrorist. It's unbelievable. And of course, I think anti-Semitism has decreased a little bit, but as in probably like since 1945, it has decreased a little bit, but it's still there. It's still there. And probably that's another reason to answer of Barak, why everybody has an involvement, is because a lot of people either hate Jews or they hate Muslims. Hey, Jews and Muslims, they should stick together because of that. Sorry, that was a bit of a simple solution, but it's still there. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why most people are Islamophobe or anti-Semites, possibly both.
But in this basic human level, I see that we keep on perpetuating trauma since birth. So the way we birth our children and the way we are raising them, perpetuating the traumas that we received from our own parents and our own culture, and then it comes all this culture that we are fighting against each other, and we are competing against each other, and we are hating ourselves, and then we are externalizing this hate against not accepting others' fault. And when you say about Islamophobia, let's think about people with black skin. How hard must be just to be born with a darker skin. You get the looks since you were born. I mean, the opportunities are much less than others just because of the color of the skin. So this is in the root of our society, and there's minorities, and I guess the yoga practices then they can help us to see ourselves and others, as you were mentioning before, and to see the humanity that we are all brothers and sisters, and how can we overcome this for real? I mean, for me, this things that we are witnessing now of incubators running out of fuel and babies dying and hospitals being bombed while people are sheltering there is so heartbreaking. And every time I am hugging my baby, my boy, I think about those things, and it's very hard, not to start crying. And but I wonder, I mean, for me, there's no darker symbolic moment from the Kali Yuga, from the age of darkness and suffering, than what we are seeing now. And I guess the reason why we are seeing now is because we have social media, so everyone has their phones, and media cannot control what is seen by people, so we are exposed to everything that's really going on there. But do you believe there is such a yuga after that? Do you believe there's a way out?
Yes, I believe that it is entirely, it's our choice. Yeah, it's our choice as a humanity, and it is within our grasp to create, let's call it an enlightened society, in which we support each other. That is entirely within our grasp. It's just that we have difficulties to move into that direction, but it is entirely possible. And of course, the thing is, let's say, as yogis, we have, on one hand, a certain duty to have an influence on the society around us, to move forward and to create a more just society, and a society in which people who have difficulties are supported, and people who are traumatized can heal. And of course, that is only possible if we have seen where we can go.
Yeah.
It is possible for humans to live together in a society without antagonism and without adversarialism. Yeah, but of course we can only be agents if we have seen that. That's why spiritual practice is so important.
Yes.
Because if I do not have a vision that I love and accept myself, and because I can love and accept every other human being as my brother and sister, whether they're Jews or Muslims, whether they are Russians or Ukrainians, only if I have found that within myself, I can actually be an agent. Yeah, because otherwise, if I don't act from that point, I will go in there and I say, you're right and you're wrong. I join the camp of the rights, and the way how we win is by exerting a superior force, more weapons, more members in our camp, and when we thwart the enemy, doesn't work. Yeah. We've done that since 5,000 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's why I think it's really important through spiritual practice to develop a vision, to have spiritual feeling in yourself, and then if you enter a conflict like that, become capable of seeing the humanity in the other and say, I'm not going to do the war thing there. Yeah, I see that those people who I'm invited to hate, who I'm invited to point the finger at, they are as human as I am. Maybe they are in a disadvantageous position. Maybe through their past they have been more traumatized than I have been. Then it's my responsibility to approach them and to try to help them out of there by refusing to write them off. So what I'm saying is, I can only be an agent of peace if I found a certain degree of peace within me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I cannot act. Otherwise, I'm being sucked into this conflict. Okay, who's right, who is wrong? I join the camp of the guys who are right. And then we just need more weapons, don't we? We need bigger guns, bigger missiles, faster jet fighters. That's how we solve the conflict. This has been going on since 5,000 years. And if we stay with that, it's going to continue for another 5,000 years. Well, we're obviously not going to live with that philosophy for another 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and your words of wisdom and your knowledge.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregor. And I hope we have more opportunities like that, because it's been really, really important, I believe, for all of us to listen to you, and that we have encounters like this to heal and inspire everybody so we can move forward together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure. It was a great honor. Thanks for having me.
Thank you too. Bye.
Bye.